We've got to dive into this. It is a very sad, horrible anniversary. It is the 1-year anniversary of the attacks in Israel, where there were reports from the people guarding the fences in Gaza that there was a breach of the fence in Gaza and that Hamas had breached the fence. They came in storming in with weapons and began murdering as many Israelis as they could find, both civilian and military. Men, women, young, old, didn't matter who you were. There was no such thing as a civilian on that day. And it was the largest scale, I believe, terrorist attack since 9/11. But it was much more detrimental when you look at percentage of population. And it kicked off what was Israel saying, this is not going to happen again. It was their never again moment. We said in the wake of 9/11, never forget. We made dramatic changes to things. But over time, I would say we've become a bit complacent in how we deal with things and how we look at terrorism and potential threats. In Israel, they don't really have that luxury. They have been under constant threat for decades, longer than that. And so, everybody's going to choose a side on this. I am going to be one of them, and I've chosen to support Israel. And I think it's something the United States should always do. I think they have been the ones that have been under attack. I think they've handled themselves appropriately. And I know that there have been a lot of people that civilians have died in Gaza, but I will say to you that that's because Hamas just doesn't care about civilians. They use hospitals, they use places of worship, they use all of these other resources as a place to hide weaponry. We know that Hezbollah is doing the same things in Lebanon, where they are hiding weapons in homes. And so then the question is, who's the one responsible for civilian deaths? The organizations that put civilians in harm's way and then have the expectation that they won't be attacked because our civilians are in their way. They're using them as human shields. And I just think, looking back, this year has been a year where Israel has set the tone of we are not taking this anymore. Here's an ABC News report about the 1-year survivors and friends reflect on this past year.
The trauma of that day is still raw. This man was the first resident of a kibbutz to return since the attack. His front door still covered by Hamas bullets.
You can see how many bullet holes there are.
Another family we spoke to still waits for their loved one taken hostage to come home.
Every day I wake up and I say, Tali's alive, Tali's coming back. I will see him hugging his family. I imagine him hugging his children.
One of the horrors of what happened that day was an attack at a music festival. I don't know if I want to use the word privileged, but I was invited to a special screening of a 47-minute unnarrated video of the attacks that day. And they've got hours, hundreds of hours of video. Not only were these people attacking innocents, but they also were videotaping it. Body cameras, cell phone cameras, traffic cameras, security cameras all over. But these individuals that were doing this were filming themselves as they did it as well. And one of the places that was attacked was a music festival. And they flew in those paragliders. They flew in on these little machines, they look like kites with a motor. And they had automatic weapons, and they began to fire on an innocent crowd of unarmed people that were just at a music festival. And the scenes from that I witnessed were absolutely mind-numbing. It was, you could not believe what you were seeing. They had, like you would see at a big music festival, they had porta-johns lined up, and then as these gunmen began to descend on this place, people were trying to find anywhere they could to hide. And gunmen were just indiscriminately shooting and just lighting up these porta-johns with people inside. There was one scene we witnessed where they had a bar, set up. It was like a square. And then inside the square on all four corners were people serving drinks and selling drinks. And there they showed the video in the aftermath of about a dozen people dead behind that were trying to hide. So here's a little bit more on the vigil at that music festival.
Somber ceremonies in Israel marking 1 year since Hamas launched a surprise cross-border attack, killing more than 1,200 people. Family and friends of victims gathered at the site of the Nova Music Festival, where more than 300 people were killed, holding a moment of silence at 6:59 this morning, the exact moment Hamas launched the attack.
So, not to I guess, belabor this, but it's important that you understand the severity, the barbarism, how barbaric this was. The video that I saw, a couple of things stood out to me. There was just indiscriminate shooting of anyone. There was a car driving down a 2-lane road, like in the middle of a country road. And there were, these these troops, terrorists from Gaza, Hamas militants, were standing on the side of the road outside of their vehicles. And as the cars drove by, they just fired their weapons into these cars, murdering the people inside the cars. And then they went and pulled the doors open and pulled the bodies out of the cars. There were a couple of scenes that I will never forget. And I remember sitting with some people, and it was a response that was an uncontrolled response, just groans in this room when we witnessed how horrible this attack was. There was inside a home, there was a guy that was laying dead on his kitchen floor. He was obviously dead. And these militants were so happy that they had done this. And I almost don't want to tell you any of these things that I saw, but he was dead on the floor, and they tried to use a shovel to take his head off. They had murdered a couple of soldiers, Israeli soldiers, and one of the commanders wanted a memento, and they used a big knife and took the soldier's head off with his helmet still on as a trophy. And it was as much about the horrible things that they were doing, but they were celebrating as if they were at a sporting event. That was the part of it that was shocking to me, was how they were celebrating. There was a phone call that was translated. So after these murders happened, one of the Hamas militants grabbed a cell phone of his victims and phoned his parents in Gaza and said, "You should be proud of your son. I've murdered more than 10 Jews." And the father was thrilled. The mother got on the phone. She was very proud of her son. And they were celebrating that they were murdering people, just absolutely gunning them down. And then they were raping the women and mutilating them after they killed them. It was the most barbaric, inhumane thing I have ever seen in my life. And it was 1 year ago. And so I wanted to spend a minute with this to talk about it, because the fighting that's happening and the PR war that's going on in the world with these pro-Palestinian blaming Israel, I guess I just want the world to see what I saw and hear what I heard. And we should never forget what happened that day.
Thanks for watching the Mike Broomhead Show. Catch up on Amazing Arizonans, a KTAR News podcast, and click the button in the middle to subscribe.